Greetings, everybody. Jeremy Burke here from Follow Me Leadership. This is podcast number 001. Going to do a little bit of an introduction as to who I am, where I came from, things I've done in my life, things I've accomplished, and then I'd like to talk to you about something I'm working on right now. So I grew up in Buffalo, suburb of Buffalo, just outside the city. Spent pretty much my entire childhood there until I was 18 and went off to college. I attended Canisius High School, which is a Jesuit high school in the city. One of the best experiences I ever had. And it was actually the same high school my father went to. And I didn't go there because he went there. I wasn't compelled to go. I was actually given the choice. But at the time of my life when I had that opportunity, it was something I definitely wanted to take. And I'm glad I chose that because it made a huge difference in my life and changed me for who I am today. After leaving high school, I started out at Northeastern University in Boston, and eventually, after a couple years there, I transferred to St. Joe's University in Philadelphia. And there's a whole story behind that, but St. Joe's was a great university. I'm glad to have graduated from there. And while I was in college, actually in high school and college, I was a competitive rower. For the rowing team, I've rowed for high school. I rowed in club teams up in Boston on the Charles River. I rowed it for St. Joe's University, as well as a couple of club programs off and on in Philadelphia and Boathouse Row. And then went on to do some off and on rowing here and there. Actually wish I would have stayed a little bit more with it because I really love the sport. It's very tough. Also, while I was in college, I did Army ROTC. I started that at Northeastern. They had their own program, and then when I was at St. Joe's, we had a satellite program. The main program was out of UPenn, and some of the schools had satellite systems set up, but I basically drove down to Penn, every week in the, a couple days in the morning for drill and for classes and whatnot for Army ROTC. I was at the end of college when I graduated. I was commissioned as an officer in the Army, as an infantry officer. It was something that and there's in another podcast I'll get into my decision making on why infantry, but it was something that I knew I wanted to do. It was something I had to do. I think, personally, I believe everybody should seriously look at serving in the military. I wouldn't ever want to compel anybody to serve in the military. I don't agree with those countries that mandate you have to serve X amount of years in the military. I don't think that builds a strong force at all. But I think every person growing up should consider it. It will change your life for sure, and it certainly did mine. So once I graduated, I did serve in the Virginia Army National Guard, in the Army Reserve. I did have a deployment to Iraq in 2005 through 2006 for about, I think all told, I was gone, 15, 16 months. I can't remember exactly how long. It might have been about 16 months, through the train up and then deployment over to Iraq. Again, that's a whole other podcast I'll get into at some point, but it was something I was proud and glad that I was able to be a part of. It really changed my life in a lot of ways. Really opened up my eyes to a lot of realities, and I think, anytime you're in a deployment situation, especially one that's a combative type, situation, I think that changes people for sure. I've also worked for Fortune 500 company. I worked for 3M company for about 12, 13 years in industrial sales. Did that up in the Boston area as well as down in eastern Pennsylvania. I've been a volunteer fireman, EMT. I did that for about 15 years. I've run a couple of businesses. One was a video production business. I did that for a couple of years up until I was deployed to Iraq. And then most recently I got into the craft beer world where I've been a brewery owner, as well as currently right now I'm a head brewer at a small brewery that's up and coming. And that's kind of me in a nutshell with a bunch of bullet points of things that I've done along the way. I think, in between all of those different points along my journey in life, there's a lot of things that are a lot of holes that need to be filled in, a lot of things that were successes and failures in my life, and it's interesting. Most recently this year, a few months ago, I started sitting down to try to write a book about things that I failed in life, and I found that one of the things that it kind of pushed me to do was to really take a hard look and analyze my entire life since I was a kid, and why things turned out the way they did, good and bad. And it actually, in writing the current book that I'm writing now, it pushed me to kind of put that aside and write another book first. And what I did is I went back to a point in my life in grade school when I was in fourth grade. So that would have put me at 10 years old, where I spent a couple of years being severely bullied and abused. It was a really dark, terrible period of my life. And I want to probably talk as much as I can about that and give as much detail as I can into that whole experience. The bullying is rampant today. It's probably more so than it was when I was a kid, because it's much easier now today. But, when I really look back on those moments back then, in fourth grade, it was, to kind of give you some perspective, in my elementary school, the kindergarten through third grade kids, started school at one time, and then fourth, fifth, and sixth started at another time, probably a half hour, 45 minutes later. So it was kind of broken up into two sections of the school, if you will. So two different bus times, two different schedules, two different lunch times, and so on. And what was the worst part about that, at least for me, was that when you left third grade and went into fourth grade, you were kind of starting over and you were now the newbie all over again, except it wasn't kindergarten where you had nap time and playtime constantly. It was, you were a regular student now, but you were now the new kid in school, if you will. And it was fourth grade was probably the toughest year, toughest struggle I've really had to endure, I think, in my entire life, including the time I spent in Iraq. At least then I was a little bit more apt and schooled in dealing with situations and problems, including enemy fire. But yeah, so the way it started for me was, and I'm going to try to give you some general sense of it, was it was on the school bus. You had the kids in fifth and sixth grade that were older, that kind of ran the bus. They were the kids in the back, and they listened to all their music, and just about every day they would make their runs, kind of wander through the bus, and just start picking on everybody. They pick on anybody and everybody. There was really no one specific person, at least until things kind of started to focus on me. And when eventually it did, probably in the first couple weeks of school, there was periods where you would hear them kind of start making their rounds from the back of the bus, and and it's a lot of what probably seems harmless when you hear about it, but it was a pretty scary time, I think, for a lot of us kids, that they're making fun of you, they make fun of what you wore, what your name was, what you look like, if your hair looks stupid. It was any way that and there was only like three of them. It was anything these three kids could do to put you down and make you feel terrible. They would do that, and they would just, they'd hammer you on everything. And it was really an interesting, when I look back on it now, and writing my first book, which is called Stand Up, Fight Back. It really is an interesting process to kind of analyze how I handled things as a kid, how we all handled things as a kid. I think personally, uh, so many mistakes that I made. I look back on now, I'm like, God, I could have changed my life completely had I handled or reacted to things differently, than I did. I know one of the things that was pretty common is as these kids would, the bullies would kind of make their rounds and go from one seat to the next or one kid to the next, making fun of this person or that person, kids started getting good at deflecting. If they were the one getting picked on, they would kind of try to point the attention to some other kid. They'd say, hey, oh, well, what about his shirt? His shirt is stupid. Or, oh, that guy's looking at you, or gave you the finger or something. Anything you could do to just divert the attention of these bullies to somebody else. And a lot of times it worked. If you were crafty enough with it and didn't make it too obvious, you could shift their attention off of you and to somebody else. And basically, it never stopped the bullying. It just stopped it for you. And these kids just kept going. And it was, I don't know what it was, whether everybody was just afraid of getting hurt or killed or beat up or whatever, but we all bowed in fear, to these kids. And when it finally came to me at one point, I remember the day it was, somebody had, it was actually a girl on the bus. She kind of deflected things at me, saying that I was laughing at them or whatever it was. But it was like all of a sudden they turned and it was like blood in the water, and the sharks just caught scent of it. And they immediately turned and were all over me. Just all their attention just pounced right on me. And it was like, it was surreal in a sense that, it was like, oh my God, I'm in the crosshairs now and they're coming after me, and I froze. This whole kind of art of deflection that a lot of these other kids seem to get, for some reason, I could never really do it. I never figured out, the right way to make that happen. And maybe once I did figure out how to do it, it was too late. But what ended up happening is, in that first day that I was getting picked on, was within minutes. Here it is, these kids are in there, they're calling you stupid, fat, gay, loser. They're making fun of your shoes, whatever. They're getting up in your face. They're, putting their finger right next to your eye and, threatening to hit you, and just anything they could. It was just so stupid. But what I ended up doing, the mistake, and this was really the turning point in my life, was I shut down. My internal body, and maybe it was a defense mechanism, that internally my body just shut down and tried to block everything out. I kind of hunkered down in my seat. I started to just stare at the floor, and I wouldn't make eye contact with these guys, and I think internally I'm just hoping that they'll go away. They'll get bored and just go away, and it didn't. In hindsight, and again, writing this book about my experiences being bullied, I can see it now, with this kind of Monday morning quarterback mentality, that I can see that I empowered these guys because there was no risk with me. I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't presenting any sort of a threat to them. In fact, I made it very inviting. And it was like, the more I tried to shut down, the worse it got, the more powerful they became. And, it just, again, in thinking about it now, it drives me crazy. I want to go back in time and grab myself by the shoulders and, shake me real vigorously, maybe slap me in the face and say, dude, get up, stand up and fight back to these kids. But I didn't. I took it. I let them basically just reduce me to a piece of garbage. And wow, I wish I could go back and change those things. Some simple things. If maybe I could have figured out how to do the deflection at least, that would have made it go away temporarily, but I didn't. And so it was like day in and day out. Maybe not every single day I was in the target, at least immediately. Eventually I was. It was a daily occurrence, but it was kind of, I know one, and you'd hear them. So another interesting thing about, we'd get on the bus in the morning, go to school, and it was, I don't know, probably a 20-minute bus ride going around picking everybody up, and you'd get to school. Well, depending on when you arrived at school, there was like an early, uh, I don't know, the earliest time in which the school would let everybody come in. So what ended up happening was you'd arrive at school and you'd sit there and you'd wait. And depending on how either short or close your bus ride was, you could be sitting there for 5 minutes or you could be sitting there for 20 minutes. And we were probably on the 20-minute end of it, sitting there. And there were some of the most painful and long 20 minutes of my life. Oh my God, if I could just have done it, maybe if I could have gotten a ride to school or something. I mean, it was awful because you'd pull in, we're parked out in front of the school. We're just sitting there and we're waiting for, I don't know, somebody. I never really figured it out, but I'm sure either it was a time or some teacher probably poked their head out the front door and waved everybody, bring them in, because all the buses would let out at once typically, or at least one would start and then the others would follow. But yeah, it was like, I can remember sitting there and just, you'd hear these three guys. Really, it was two of them. The two guys that were the worst. They were the ones that did the most. I think damage, I guess you could call it, or the most bullying. You could hear them because like eventually, like they always one guy brought a boom box, and if you didn't grow up in the 70s and 80s, if you were born after 1990 or whatever, you probably don't know what a boombox was. But a boombox was just a big giant radio, probably that big, and had a couple of speakers on it, and usually had a radio tape deck. We didn't have CDs back then, and they would be playing their music. One depending on what they were playing for the day, but it ranged all varying heavy metal bands that would play. But yeah, so all of a sudden you'd be sitting there for a few minutes and the music would just stop. And it was like, what was interesting is that, so as we're sitting on the bus, everybody's chatting about whatever. You're talking about either what you did the night before or the weekend before, or you're talking about classes and, stuff you saw on TV or whatever. It didn't, everybody's chit-chatting. All of a sudden that music would stop and the entire bus would go silent because nobody wanted to be heard talking because for fear of drawing attention. And so you're sitting there and you're all of a sudden just, you're talking away, and now you're like, okay, we should be quiet now. And maybe it's like a dull roar, and then eventually changes to a whisper, and then eventually nobody says a word. Everybody's just sitting there like, oh boy, here it comes, and that's when these guys, they would get up and they'd start making their rounds. A lot of times it happened before the bus got to school, but predominantly because you're bored. You're sitting there for, 10, 20 minutes, you get bored as a kid. And so they would just start, just chit-chat, they'd move around, start talking to somebody, and then they would look at somebody else and make fun of them, and then it was off. It was like that, gave them a quick little taste of that drug, which was bullying somebody else, owning another person, and they were off, and they were ruthless. Didn't matter if you were a boy or a girl, white, black, Asian, none of that mattered. It was, everybody was a target, and we all dreaded it, all of it. All of my friends, all of my peers, even kids that were the same grade and age as those other kids, we all dreaded it. And, so it would start and they would just make their rounds. And it got to the point where that first day where they targeted me, there were times where sometimes it would come to me quicker. Other times maybe they forgot. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, let's go over and make fun of this kid because he's a real putz. But yeah, and I remember one of the worst moments was there was a girl kind of sitting on the seats across the aisle from me and behind one row, and her and I were friends. We had hung out together on some weekends. We would go play in the woods or do whatever. And I remember at one point she was getting made fun of. They were calling her a slut or, whatever. These guys, they would throw out anything just to figure out what's your weak point, what's your pain point, where can we break you, and they'll go down a laundry list of insults until they get to something that triggers you, and then boom, now they got you. And at one point she deflected to me, but it was in like such a way, that I think at one point, like, she said something like, "Aren't you guys bored of me?" And then she pointed right at me. She's like, "What about Jeremy? He's about to cry." And it was like they quickly turned and were like, "Ah, right," and they immediately just came pounced right over. One was behind me in the seat, the other was kind of next to me in the aisle, and the whole time I'm looking this girl dead in the eye, like, "What the hell did you just do to me?" And we were friends. I mean, we'd been friends since kindergarten, and here was she just completely turned on me, and I could have killed her for it. Yeah, and so these boys just started on me again, and it was, and I would just hunker down. I'd put my head down. I'd kind of had my backpack sitting in my lap, and I just kind of hold on to that, and just kind of, you get into like a crash position on an airplane, and just I'd sit there, and I would sit there completely lifeless, just blank stare at my knees or at the floor, and that's when they just started just hammering you with insults and laughing, and then what was worse is that everybody else would support them with laughter because everybody was glad all the attention is off of them and now is on this poor soul, and everybody else, I could hear them all laughing at me, and it wasn't necessarily because they all thought I was stupid or gay or a loser or whatever, or they would make fun of your mother, your father, anything. It was all these other kids just thought, thank God I'm not the one in that seat right now. And so they would keep the laughter up, and and it was kind of like their way of, making sure the bullies saw this as the better target. And and I get it to a degree. I hated it, and I hated all those people that were my friends that were kind of, supporting that or getting behind that. But I get why they do it. And, that's something that's taken me decades to kind of come to. I mean, there were kids there that I would have said were like my best friends. And after, I'd say probably 5th grade into 6th grade, I just wrote them all off. I was done. You left me on the battlefield alone to die and laughed at me on the way out. You're done. And, but I look back on it now, it was because they were thankful that they weren't the targets. And, so anyways, and I'm trying to keep as general as possible. I could go on and on about this whole bullying experience for hours. But what was interesting to me was, when it, as it escalated to different levels, initially it started with, hey, let's just make fun of this kid. Then it was, let's really pounce on this kid and dig into his soul and make him feel terrible. And, and just kept pushing. And of course, there's no pushback from me, which is what made it worse. But now, all of a sudden, here's a way for us to get this kid. We're going to take it to another level. So that's where it became physical. And, when I say physical, I don't mean they dragged me off the bus and just started pounding on me. And, that's, that isn't necessary. It started gradual, eventually the pounding did come. But, no, it started with just, like I said, it was always you'd play these stupid games where you'd put your finger next to somebody's face and like, don't touch my finger, don't touch me. So you got to lean away and turn away, and they're just coming closer, and it's like you feel like the finger hitting your eyelash, and you got to move or they're going to poke you in the eye. And if for some reason they poked you in the eye, that was your aggression on them. And if any time you ever you would get hit for it if you happen to allow their finger to touch you. And and then it was, they would basically kind of like flick your ears in the back and slap the back of your head. And that is an awful thing. And again, it sounds stupid. I guess, it's funny when I say it now, I'm like, dude, that's so stupid. It's nothing. I mean, I trained in martial arts. I've done, I've been in some fights. I've had a lot worse pain than that, but I didn't know that as a kid. That was excruciating, to get physically assaulted like that. And when it just comes over and over and over again, and you're getting it from several directions, one kid hits you, flicks your ear on this side, and slaps you in your head on that side, and you're just getting bounced back and forth like a basketball. And again, so like I said before, I was shutting down and just trying to just remove myself, try to escape out of my body, like in some sort of astral projection kind of a thing. I wanted to get away from it, away from my physical self. So I shut down deeper and deeper into a dark hole. And, what ended up happening, what really made things monumentally worse, was I lost control of myself and I started to cry. And, tears would start coming down my face. It wasn't like a whimpering, out loud whining, crying or whatever, but it was just tears would flow because I felt sorry for myself. I felt miserable. And it was like they had struck gold. It was such a victory for these guys to have been able to achieve such a reaction, to get a reaction like that out of me. They produced my tears through their words and their actions, and the threat of further violence. That was their victory. And it was like, again, the sharks sensing blood in the water, and it was like, we can make a person cry. What more can we do? How much more deeper can we push this? And the bullying just got worse and worse day in and day out. And and that's only like the first probably 2 months of my fourth grade experience. It hasn't even gotten bad yet, but that's what my life all of a sudden became. And it's again, in writing that book, it really made me take a hard look at how we allow things as a community, as a society, how we allow the bullying to happen, and how it I wouldn't say we foster it. I'm sure there's some people that argue that we promote it or whatever, but I think it's we promote it or we foster it through inaction. And it's through an immense naivete. We try to take the easy way out, and I look at, and again, bullying today is 10 times worse than it ever was when I was a kid, because of the evolution of the smartphone and texting, and we don't necessarily have chat rooms anymore, but you got Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram and all this stuff. And what kids are going through now is so different than what I had to experience. So I do plan on doing a whole other podcast at some point on cyberbullying. Actually, we're trying to research a couple of experts on that. I'd love to bring on as a guest to talk about it. But I bring it up just because it's kind of showing the evolution of how bullies are constantly adapting to the environment to continue to do what they do, which is oppress somebody else. And it's much easier to do it today. But I look back on those experiences. I know in writing that book about the bullying experiences, and I think I'm getting it edited right now, and I'm hopefully going to publish it in the next couple weeks. But the last page count, I think I was at around a little over 200, maybe 220. And the first probably 150 pages is all about my bullying experience from 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And, so go back to take a step back, on this. When I, kind of left grade school, went on to high school and college and so on, all of those awful memories and everything, I suppressed them tremendously. I became an expert at compartmentalization. I should have joined the CIA. I probably would have been great. I mean, I could really push things down into my soul and keep them there, and really just kind of operate under a new mentality as if they never happened, as if I wasn't shaped and molded by those experiences. But, anyways, but in writing this book, one of the first things I found myself, as I'm doing the Monday morning quarterback thing, I'm analyzing this 10-year-old boy who's getting bullied incessantly and think, trying to, commentate like, dude, get up, do something, hit that kid, push back, anything. I also found myself saying, where the hell is the bus driver in all this? Where are the teachers? Where's the principal and parents and and it's interesting that I started to really develop, as I'm writing, I developed a real rage of anger against that bus driver and the teachers and principal, because I have young kids now, and I know that they experience some minor bullying, in grade school. They're in high school at the moment, and they certainly didn't have to deal with what I dealt with. But I look back on it, I'm like, there were adults present, the bus driver especially, and I go into this in my book. That bus driver was there every day of my torment. She saw what I went through. She heard what I went through, and at the end of the day, so in the bus ride to school, I was like the fourth or fifth kid to get on. In the bus ride home, I was typically the last person to get off. It was like a slightly different route, but I was the last person to get off the bus. So, I mean, and there were a couple of days, I'm not kidding. There were a couple of days where as I'm getting off the bus and my face is all red, I got snot and tears running down my face. I'm all disheveled because I've been slapped around for the last half hour. She would look at me and just, it was an acknowledgement that she knew what was going on. I remember one time in particular, she's like, if you just tell these boys to go away, they'll leave you alone. And I remember thinking to myself, like, are you kidding me? After what I just endured, and there was a couple of days where it was really traumatic. A couple of days, and she would make these comments. But what I really took out of it was she knew. She saw it. She knew everything that was going on. And yet really didn't do anything. There were a couple times she got involved, but not because she was coming to my defense or thought that what was going on was wrong. Was because things were getting loud and raucous, and it was to the point where it was bothering her. Maybe it distracted her from her driving or something. So that's when she would lose her mind, is if we bothered her. She'd literally sit up in front of the bus and just, it'd be like the equivalent of today riding the bus with, a set of headphones on and listening to music, just completely ignoring what's going on behind you. But yeah, so, I mean, I think back on those moments and I'm like, there were people involved. There were people that knew. I know a couple of those times when I got off the bus, my mom would take one look at me and just her heart would break. And my heart breaks today thinking about it. Like, my mother knew, she tried her best to try to fix this. And she tried to, my mom probably grew up in a little bit more of a sheltered society. My dad grew up in the city of Buffalo. So he was a little bit more tough on stuff like this. But, she grew up trying to trust the system. So, she did like what any parent, what any mother would do. You'd call the school immediately and report this. And, she went and met with the principal and raised holy hell that, something needs to be done. And I had several meetings with the principal and the bullies and in the same room. Oh, that was awful. And I think back on those moments now as I wrote this book on the bullying, that, okay, here are several adults, in a scholastic administrative type role, a non-parental role, basically, teacher, principal, bus driver, they're in that administrative scholastic role that are 100% aware of what's going on, yet really didn't do anything. It was a lot of lip service. You'd puff your chest out, you'd make a lot of empty threats about suspension and expulsion and we'll call state troopers in and all this, but none of that ever happened. Even after, we'd come into the principal's office, the bullies would get their butts reamed by the principal, and I'd have probably a good 3 or 4 days of some peace, but it's a manner of peace living in fear, waiting for it to start up again. But it always did, and it would start gradually again. They'd test the waters, and once they were confident they were going to get away with it, boom, it was off to the races again. And so one of the things I did when I was writing this book, I wanted to spend a lot of time really giving a very clear picture, not only of how things were happening, but what it did to me. What it did to me emotionally, the level of PTSD that I was developing. I mean, I'm 10 years old, 10, 11, and 12, and I'm developing PTSD. That's not right. It's terrible to any of these. It's like, I don't know, any of these kids that experience really traumatic situations like that as a kid, it really messes you up. And disclaimer here, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a degree in, child psychology or any sort of therapy, or I'm not a therapist. And actually writing this book was my therapy. I never went to therapy for any of that stuff. I rejected it, because I pushed all those feelings and those fears and the memories down and away, and I hated myself as that victim kid. And I mean, if I could have gone back in time, I probably would have, kicked my own ass. I hated myself and what I allowed to have happened there. And, so I suppressed all those things. And I think in writing this book, and, I started this past February 2019, and I gave myself 3 months. I'm going to write this book in 3 months or I'm not going to do it. Because I didn't want to be sitting here 3-4 years from now still putting down some thoughts, I'm writing this, I'm getting it done. And, that's more of who I am today. That was my therapy, in a sense. That was 3 months of intense, therapy, not with a trained psychologist or somebody who could guide me or pull things out. It probably would have gone a lot faster, I guess. But no, it was just me, a lot of alcohol and going to the gym to deal with it. But it was probably one of the best things I ever did, because it really just helped me analyze how all those things happened, why they happened, and why they continued to go. And then eventually, I really, like, now I look back on all those moments and I try to reread my own book every week as I'm waiting on it being edited, and I can now look at how it led to who I became. All the different failures I have in life, I can trace back to those moments. And it's kind of the premise of my second book that I'm working on right now, which I'll go into in another podcast. But yeah, it's so anyways, looking back on those moments, I start to think, well, how do we stop this, or how do we fix it? How do we're going to end all this, and I'm as I'm saying that, I'm hearing, like, in my head the voices that you see in the news or the internet, or you read in articles about people like, we're going to end bullying and we're going to put a stop to these bullies. And this, you're never going to stop it. You're never going to end it. I'll give you the complete logical justification for that statement. We have laws and education and a community outreach that tells everybody that murder is bad. Yet, don't we have murders happen every day in this country? I know that's not the concrete or the end-all be-all argument, that why we'll never end bullying, but to the point of something, conduct by somebody else is bad, and we can legislate against it, we can create rules against it, we can mandate it. The problem is it won't go away until we all stop being victims. If I could go back, to my 10-year-old self, I think it was actually 9 when it first began, that second or third week of school, that fourth grade, I would have, after that first day, I would have told myself, stop being a victim. Actually, I would tell myself the words my father gave me, probably a year, maybe 8 or 9 months after it all began. We were out in the yard. We were throwing a baseball around. It was Little League time, and we were kind of getting ready before a game or before a practice or whatever. We were just having a catch, And one of the bullies was riding by my house on our street on his bike. And as he rode by, he yelled, "Loser," real loud. And it made me feel so terrible. Maybe it was like Burke's a loser or something like that. Anyways, it made me feel so terrible because he did it in front of my dad. I felt embarrassed and ashamed of myself. And I started to cry. And my dad came over at one point. I'll never forget this. He put his hand on my shoulder, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "Look, I'll get involved in this. I'll do my best to make this go away. I'll talk to the school if that's what you want. But I can tell you right now, this will never go away. It will never stop by these boys or anyone else until you stand up and fight back. Plain and simple." And I'll never forget hearing those words, and I lost it. I broke down crying, not because I was so moved by what my dad said to me. Today I'm very moved by what he said to me. As a dad, that moves me. But I broke down crying because I was afraid. It was, by the time he came around and said that to me, it was too late. I was so down in this deep pit of darkness, of fear, that I couldn't even contemplate or even utter a thought of fighting back against somebody. Fear owned me. And I think in the next podcast, number 2, I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth on that stuff, because I think a lot of it still applies today. But it was my dad gave me the ultimate answer on how to fix this, but I was too afraid. It was too far gone to even contemplate it. But that's the thing. In today's society, in our schools, let's take a real hard look at how do we handle bullying today. We have these we watch videos, or we had the class watch a video on being making friends and not making anyone else feel bad, and that we're all the same, and we're all equal, and everybody should be loved, and we should respect one another, and and all that's great. And I'm not trying to say that stuff is wrong. That's not it at all. That's only a small part of it. That's only that's kind of like the the window dressing, if you will. You look back at the bus driver, the teacher, the principal that knew this was going on. I put myself in their shoes. That bus driver, she allowed those kids to walk from seat to seat and terrorize everybody every day. The fact that she let them get up out of their seats, is amazing. Now, I know today things have changed a lot. We don't let kids wander around while the bus is driving. That's not because of bullying, though. That's because of school districts and bus companies being sued, during an accident, because there was an accident and the kid got hurt because they weren't in their seat. I know some bus companies now are putting in seatbelts in buses. My kids didn't have seatbelts in their buses, but I have heard or seen some things that there are doing that. But that, again, that's not because of bullying. All that was done because it was a financial liability thing. And that's something else too. In hindsight, man, I wish my mom had just called a lawyer and said, you know what, we're suing the school district of Clarence, New York, and we're gonna just take them for whatever they can, because they're systematically allowing this to go on and on and on year after year. I mean, that wouldn't have fixed it. It would have certainly meant we would have had, some nicer stuff, maybe, but maybe that was one of the push in the direction that the school district needed, was to get sued. But the teachers that knew, the principal that knew, at what point, was somebody, drag these bullies into the principal's office, but tell their parents, you got to be down at school today, 2:00. We're having a meeting. If you don't show up, we're going to call the police, and your kids are going to get arrested. Or schedule a meeting for another day or something. I mean, something, make those parents become a part of it. We don't do that. We're actually, the school districts today, and you can see this in a lot of cases, we're very protective of making anyone feel bad because they're doing something wrong. And part of all this preaching about love and respect and just being nice to everyone, we're also trying to show niceness and respect to the bullies, even when they're out of line. Some of these school shootings that gone on, I mean, there's been cases where the kid in question who shot other people was maybe being bullied, or he was a bully, or she was a bully, whatever, but it was incident after incident after incident. It's like, how many incidents have to occur in or off school property before somebody does something, prior to the actual shooting? The schools know about this stuff. The teachers know about this stuff. I think a lot of, now parents are also to blame too. I happen to have two parents that, they thought they were doing the right thing, or they knew they were doing the right thing. They did everything they could to, my mom trusted the system. My dad held back and wasn't gonna, this was a different age than when he grew up, just like today is a different age than when I grew up. I don't, and they certainly did the best, but, and I don't fault anything my parents did, because they were right all along the way. The only fault was maybe with my mom, and God bless her, she tried so hard to protect me and to fix this, but the fault was trusting the system. I mean, imagine your child is being tormented every single day in school, on the bus, even sometimes around the neighborhood, and you're calling the school. I mean, especially the moms out there. The mama bear comes out, and you just want to rip everybody apart, But my mom did her best to try to do things professionally and trust the system and do, engage in an appropriate manner as an adult, as an accomplished and educated adult, not just, threaten to hurt everybody, like some of the trash people did. And I talk about this in my book, that when my mom did call the mom of one of the bullies, and this woman was utter trash, and the way she spoke to my mother, I didn't have to hear what she said, but I could tell what she said. And, it floored my mom, because she just couldn't believe, you're clearly not parenting your child. But, to the point, I mean, so you look at, the parents of the kids that are bullies. When you have an incident in school of kids that are getting bullied, it's pretty obvious. All right, teachers and, bus drivers and principals and whoever, they identify this. Maybe maybe they don't know, but the parents bring it to light. First reaction should be, okay, let's bring the kids in, separate, let's gather some information or whatever, but then let's bring all the parents in, separate as well, and let's have meetings and let's discuss this. I mean, especially today, you have to react Uh, Not with a zero tolerance knee jerk reaction, because that doesn't fix anything. But you also can't ignore it. I mean, when I was a kid, in the 70s and 80s, there were no school shootings, at least not that I knew of. If there was, it was a shock to me. I never had heard of anything like that until well after I finished college. I mean, nobody went into a school and shot everybody up because they were bullied or that they were depressed or suicidal or whatever, whatever the reason. It doesn't matter. But when you hear about this stuff today, you have to react. And it to me it's simple. And I've been on both sides of this, and as now as an observer of life, an outsider, if you will, it's pretty obvious what needs to happen. If a kid comes forward and there's bullying going on, you call those parents of the bullying. You say, you need to get down to school next week. If it's like a Friday, say, hey, listen, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday afternoon, what works best? We need you to come in. We're going to sit down with you and your son or daughter, and we're going to talk about some bullying that's going on, and we're going to have a plan. I mean, that's the first step. That is the real step. To go out and hire. I mean, it drives me crazy. My kids, when they're in elementary school, I don't know how old they were, what grade they were in, but let's say it was third grade or fourth grade or whatever. They had like a school assembly, and it was some magician guy who came in, and he was the anti-bullying magician. And as he performed his tricks, he would talk about, respecting others and don't bully other people or other kids and don't make anyone else feel bad. And I remember sitting there like, when I heard about this, I'm like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But that's the programs we see in schools today. Really? A magician guy, he's going to somehow wave his wand and, pull the rabbit out of the hat and fix the bullying problem. No, I mean, you treat this, and again, and I hate the zero tolerance policies. I think none of them work. Like the kid that makes a gun or draws a gun out of his piece of bread from his sandwich or draws a picture of a gun on a piece of paper, and all of a sudden we call the state troopers. That doesn't fix anything. I think that's the most stupidest thing I've ever heard. But if you know that there's kids that are aggressive and that are bullying other kids, what a great time to make a difference in everybody's lives. Bring them in with their parents, sit them down, say, here's what's going on. We've seen it. We've witnessed it. We've got reports of it. We've got statements from these other kids, other parents, or whatever. And come up with a plan. I don't care what that plan is. Come up with some sort of plan. Say, hey, we're going to meet every couple of weeks, but I need to know from you guys, you as the parent, what are you doing? What is your plan, or how do you foresee you're going to fix this? And if you don't have a plan or don't desire a plan, it's going to affect you legally and financially. How many more school shootings do we need? How many more incidents of, I'm not going to go into it in this podcast because I think we're already kind of pushing the limit on time here, but, how many more young kids, children need to commit suicide because they've been tormented and picked on and bullied all their lives before we say enough is enough? What the hell, people? I mean, suicide, a child. I mean, when I was a kid, when I started getting bullied at 9 and 10 years old, I never knew anyone or heard of a story of a kid of my age committing suicide, or anybody that matter. I mean, maybe you might hear of an adult or something, but at the time that would have been written off as that is these are adult problems or whatever. As a child, you wouldn't have acknowledged it. Today, my kids, they know other kids are committing suicide. We haven't thank God we haven't had anyone in our school system that has done that, but it happens. It happens all over the place in our county, in our state, all over the place. when are we going to say enough is enough? I mean, how many more magicians and video programs do we got to make the classes watch and the kids go through before we say that's it? Enough is enough. Um, the bullying is going to continue. It's going to go on and on and on and on. It's human nature to want to dominate others. Now, when I say that, the kids that are bullying are not the tough, strong kids that grow up and be like the star quarterback of the football team. Maybe once in a while, I'm sure, but it's not. Those aren't the kids that are bullying. It's the kids that are troubled at home. The kids that have issues that they're dealing with, and they don't know how to deal with them, so they lash out. And the easiest way to lash out is find the weaker kid. That's where the bullies come from. I know that those kids that bullied me, they were trash. They came from trash families. Their parents were trash. It was just an awful, upbringing that they had. And that's probably the one thing I keep in mind today that keeps me from, reaching out to them, going to find them now and saying, hey, I'm older now. I'm wiser. I'm skilled. I'm trained. You ready to fight? I wouldn't do that now as an adult. I wouldn't do it generally as an adult. It's, because I'd be sued. But, I look back on that. Those kids were trash because they had no proper upbringing. They had no love at home. And I knew that, especially now, looking back on it, I know that for fact, based off that phone call that my mom made to that one kid's mom, when she screamed at my mom and basically told her to, where to get off and to go F off and whatever, I mean, that woman was the problem. She was the problem. That home life was the problem. And I don't know if, both parents were in the situation or not. I really never, I didn't care to look into his situation and figure out that scenario. But, I mean, the fact remains, that kid struggled as an adolescent because he had terrible parents and terrible upbringing, and that would, like most bullies, that was his way of dealing with it, was to take out his aggression on somebody weaker, and unfortunately, I happen to be that kid. He found kinship amongst some other trashy people, and they teamed up, and they were just basically a bad force. One bright light before I kick off or end this, that, or a quick story. It was after that first year, I believe, of being bullied. So where I grew up, in the suburbs of Buffalo, there was this huge expanse of woods out behind us, and everybody used to go ride their bikes through the woods, and we had this huge quarry that everybody used to ride bikes through, and older kids had dirt bikes and four-wheelers and three-wheelers and whatnot, and you would, every weekend, everybody was out there. And there was one weekend in particular, I was out there with a buddy of mine, and the two guys that were bullying me came upon the location, and I'm standing around with a bunch of kids in high school. I'm in, going into 5th grade at this point, and I'm just a fly on the wall, just kind of hanging out because I was with my friends. We were there, and these two bullies came upon, the location, and we're hanging out, and everybody kind of generally knew each other because we all went to school together or had younger brothers and older brothers that, and sisters that went to school together. And the two guys that bullied me recognized me right away and pounced on me. They were like ready to like murder me. And one older kid, just a random kid, I don't remember his name. I wish I could, because I'd try to look him up and, take him out for a beer or something. But this kid looked out for me, and he was older. He was probably, I don't know, if I had to guess, he was maybe a junior, senior in high school. He was 4 or 5 years older than, me and, the bullies and whatnot. Anyways, he quickly intervened, and it was like one kid that was really bullying me the most, he got in his face. It was like, what are you doing, dude? What's wrong with you? Leave the kid alone. He was a good kid. And it was just that moment of somebody intervening and stepping in and saying, knock it off. I remember that to this day. I've remembered it every moment of my life whenever I'm faced with adversity, or when I see someone else faced with adversity. I remember that exact moment. I remember the kid's face. I remember that he got off his motorcycle. It was a giant trail bike. It was an old Honda 500 CR. It's a mammoth, dirt bike. And this kid got off this thing, and he was tall and lanky and smoked cigarettes, and I thought he was the coolest thing in the world. And he basically stood up for me. We never met. He didn't know me. He didn't know who I was. But I was just one of the kids that was hanging out with everybody as we're all talking about dirt bikes and heavy metal and whatever, And he stood up for me in that moment, and I'll never forget it. And it was awesome because the kids that were bullying me were like, "Whoa, we're sorry," we like to poke fun at this kid. And he's like, "Well, knock it off. Stop being an a-hole." And man, it was such an awesome moment. And we need to have more of that in life. Most importantly, we need to start teaching kids that, while we as adults or some older kids, we can all get involved and we can help kind of thwart what's going on with you. But you, as the person being bullied, you need to stand up and fight back. You need to stop being a victim and fight for yourself. And I don't care what your adversity is in life. That applies in business. I've experienced bullying and, many facets of my life, even in the workplace, by a boss, let's say. You can read countless of stories in journals or whatnot of people being bullied by their boss, whether they're women being bullied by a male chauvinistic boss, or just women being bullied by another woman, or just anybody, a man. I was a man, and my boss was a man, and he bullied the hell out of me. And I struggled trying to figure out how to deal with it. And I can tie it directly back to when I was bullied as a kid. Because initially I shut down, and by the time I started to figure out how to really deal with it, it was too late. And we'll go into that on another time. But man, I just think we need to start teaching people to stand up for themselves. We need to stop trying to rely on the system to look out for our best interests. Stop relying on the system to fix things for us. It starts with you. You have to be the first step to fix things before you can invoke help from someone else. That's my story. Hey, hopefully I connected something with somebody out there. At least one person would be cool. This is going to be a long-term podcast. Like I said, I wrote a book called Stand Up, Fight Back. It's on my experiences being bullied. I also talk about how the system broke down all along the way, and then how I think we can fix it. I'm writing a follow-on book to that about my life experiences, well after grade school, and how all of my failures and how I, how the bullying affected me, and, how I take ownership of it. I got a couple, actually about 2 or 3 other book ideas that I'm kind of been working on over the years, just throwing stories down and writing things. But I need to get these 2 out of the way first. But yeah, if you have questions, please find me on, you can email me at jburkleadership@gmail.com. I've got a website that I'm building right now. I just need to get that done, and, I'll get a follow me leadership, email going. The term follow me leadership comes from, as an infantry officer, our motto as in the infantry was follow me. Because as an infantry officer, you are out front, you lead the way, and you show the path for others to follow. And that's kind of my mantra that I've been trying to live with, ever since I went to infantry school. But yeah, so find me there. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All the links will be here on the video. I'll have this podcast on. I launch everything into Anchor, and then it pushes out to iTunes and Spotify and whoever else. but you can also find you'll find these videos on YouTube. And if you need me for an appearance, whether you're a school or a business or a parent organization or whatever it is, please let me know. I'd love to come and speak. I'm very early in the game on that, so as it is right now, I'm very negotiable. For schools, I don't, like elementary schools and high schools, I don't charge a thing for that. But if there's anything I can do to help, if you have questions, if you have topics or something you'd like me to address or follow up on, please let me know. Shoot me an email, or just DM me on Instagram or something. Other than that, hey, stay happy, stay well. Get up every day to try to do something better for yourself. I don't care what it is. And, if I can tell you the bottom line from being bullied and crouching down in that bus seat and feeling terrible to today, if there's anything I've learned, it's, every day stand up and fight back. Get up and do something. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, don't lay there in bed and hit snooze several times. Don't, sit there and contemplate what you're going to do for the day. Just get up and go do something. Just start doing something. It took me a long time to figure that out, unfortunately. But life begins tomorrow. So, cheers, everybody. Again, Jeremy Burke with the Follow Me Leadership Podcast. This was my first one. Hope you'd enjoy. Please rate me and follow me on all my social media outlets. Take care.